The bill lands on the table, and he reaches for the expensive bottle before anyone else can read the room. That hand does not move because the wine is special. It moves because silence makes him nervous, and money is the fastest way he knows to cut through it. You have seen this before: the half-second pause, the quick glance around the table, the tiny performance of ease. The room does not hear taste. It hears a man trying not to be measured. And that measurement starts immediately. The first uncapped bottle changes the temperature of the table. Now the others know who is willing to absorb cost, who is willing to make himself visible, who is willing to turn a social moment into a financial one. The bottle is no longer a drink. It is a signal sent under pressure. Why does he do it? Because being ordinary feels dangerous when everyone is watching. Because cheap can sound like small. Because he would rather pay than wait to be respected. That is the mechanism. The purchase is not about the liquid in the glass. It is about the feeling of not being overlooked. Thorstein Veblen named the larger pattern conspicuous consumption, but the live version is much uglier. It is not elegance. It is anxiety with a receipt. And here is the part most men miss. The room remembers the move long after it forgets a label on the bottle. It remembers who bent first. It remembers who made himself financially easy to read. You feel that in real time, even if you never say it out loud. 5 layers are coming, and each one strips the gesture a little further until what looked like confidence is exposed as something much weaker. Watch the friend who leans back and says, "Get the nicer one." Not because the wine list matters to him, because the table matters. The waiter sets the bottle down, and nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. No one claps. No one says thank you with enough force to match the cost. But the air changes. The others stop scanning the list the same way. They let him lead. He has volunteered to absorb expense, and the room quietly starts treating him as the man built for that role. That is the status tax. You pay it once in public, then you keep paying it in people's heads. The bill is not only on the paper. It gets written into how others estimate your tolerance for cost, your willingness to cover discomfort, your place in the group. And once that estimate exists, every future dinner arrives with a silent assumption attached to it. Thorstein Veblen saw the older version of this over a century ago and called it conspicuous consumption. The mechanism has not changed much. The purchase is not mainly for use. It is a signal that can be seen. At a table, that signal is brutal because it is immediate. You do not have to be rich to make it. You only have to look like the kind of man who will pay without flinching. The room remembers that faster than it remembers the taste of the wine. Look at the friend who insists on the premium bottle when the house option would have done the job. He is not just choosing liquid. He is buying a position inside the group's imagination. He wants the table to infer strength from the size of the gesture. And the terrible part is that the gesture works well enough to become a habit. One clean move, one approving glance, one round of nods, and the mind starts calling that relief. What did he actually buy? A brief drop in uncertainty. For a few minutes, he is not the man who might be overlooked, or measured, or quietly ranked low. He is the man who can take the hit. That feeling is expensive because it is temporary. The room moves on. The account does not. The expensive bottle is often less a drink than an admission fee. And once you see it, you start noticing who keeps paying just to stay on small. He pays for the round, and the silence does not stay silent. Watch the table after that first high-end glass lands in front of everyone. Shoulders loosen. Someone who was checking his phone looks up. The joke that died a minute ago comes back with a little more oxygen. The room has not become warmer by accident. It has been reassigned around the man who absorbed the cost. He did not just buy drinks. He bought a temporary position. That is the trick. You are not paying only for alcohol. You are paying to be seen as the man who can carry weight without blinking. The price is a signal, but the real target is faster than taste. It is status. It is the hope that one visible move can erase the risk of looking ordinary. Can you feel that calculation? Not what do I want, but what will they think if I do nothing? They say, let's just keep it easy tonight. The weak response is the one that hears danger in that sentence and reaches for spectacle. He orders loud. He spends bigger. He forces the room to notice him because silence feels like disappearance. The powerful response is simple. Easy is fine. No flinch. No performance. No panic purchase. That difference matters because respect earned through competence takes time, while respect bought in a single gesture has to be repurchased every time the room forgets you. The first version builds position. The second rents attention. And rent comes due. This is why the expensive round can become a habit so fast. Once the group has felt you as the man who pays, the social temperature changes around your presence. You start arriving inside an expectation. There's a subtle pressure in that. If you don't repeat the move, you risk being read as smaller than before. So the gesture that was meant to close a gap becomes the thing that keeps the gap open. You are not only spending money, you are defending an image. Erving Goffman understood the machinery here with his idea of impression management. He knew people do not merely reveal themselves in public. They stage themselves. That is why the room reacts so quickly to the man who volunteers to cover the tab of approval. He has offered a clean, legible role, generous, unbothered, socially fluent. The group rewards the role because it is easy to read. But that reward is shallow. It is a receipt, not a bond. The moment the next tense silence arrives, the mind reaches for the same solution. Another round. Another visible move. Another attempt to buy a feeling that should have been earned through steadiness. That is how short-term approval starts charging interest. Cheap praise is never cheap. And the worst part is how noble it feels while it drains you. One night you call it generosity. The next night you call it tradition. Then you call it standards. By the time you notice the pattern, the room has already trained you. What comes next is worse, because the drink is no longer the point. It becomes a costume the moment he says the name of the bottle out loud. Not because the wine is magic, because the room changes around the name. The waiter pauses. Two heads turn. One man at the table leans back a fraction, as if the air has been assigned a higher price. And the guest who ordered it tries to stay calm, tries to make the request sound routine, almost bored. That is the tell. He is not buying taste. He is buying a temporary version of himself. You can feel the mechanism if you watch closely. First comes the selection. He scans the list and lands on the bottle with the longest number next to it, not because he knows the vineyard by memory, but because that number does work before he does. Then comes the voice. Flat. Controlled. Casual enough to imply that this is normal for him. Then comes the pause after he orders, the tiny internal check. Did anyone notice that I did that like it meant nothing? That pause is the whole transaction. He is waiting for the room to return a reflected image of a man who belongs here. That is the borrowed identity. For one night, the bottle lets him stand inside an expensive room and feel less like a visitor. The label, the decanter, the waiter's attention, the slight nod from across the table, all of it feeds a story he has been starving for. Not status. Recognition. There's a difference, and the difference is expensive. Charles Cooley had a cold name for the larger mechanism, the looking-glass self. You see yourself through the imagined eyes of other people, and if your own self-trust is weak, their reaction becomes your mirror. So the bottle is not only a purchase. It is a rented reflection. He pays for the moment when the room seems to confirm that he is the kind of man who can sit at this table without apology. How many things in your life are really bids for that reflection? That is why the habit is addictive. The account balance can say one thing while the table says another, and the table is louder. The man who does this is not usually in love with wine. He is in love with the feeling that he has crossed a social threshold. But the threshold resets every time. Next dinner, next room, next group, and the same little hunger comes back. The costume has no memory. It only fits until the bill arrives. And that is the trap. A costume feels like identity when you do not trust your own face. Say that slowly. If you need the room to hand you your worth, you will keep renting it from strangers. You there. Yes, you. Take a breath. At the next business dinner, the loudest man at the table is the one opening his wallet before the waiter has even finished the sentence. He waves off the menu, names a bottle nobody asked for, and the room tilts toward him for a second. You can feel it happen. The others lean back. The check gets lighter in the mind before it ever reaches the table. And the quiet guest across from him does almost nothing at all. He orders the house pour. That tiny choice does more than save money. It sets a different temperature. No performance. No rescue attempt. No need to buy the room's attention with something expensive and fragile. He is saying, without saying it, that he will not let strangers decide what his dignity costs. Warren Buffett has built a public life around that kind of refusal. No theatrical display. No hunger to look expensive. He can afford the optics and still declines them. That is not accident. That is control. Watch what happens after the order. The generous man becomes the social center, but not always in the way he thinks. People start expecting him to carry the evening. He gets thanked early, then quietly budgeted for. The room remembers who absorbed the cost. And the quiet guest, the one who asked for the house wine without apology, gets something else. He is harder to use, harder to read, harder to price. That is the cheap signal. It looks small because it refuses decoration, but it carries a sharper message than the expensive one. Anyone can perform abundance for one dinner. Fewer men can sit inside a room of polished egos and not flinch when they are underestimated for 20 minutes. Which one do you think has more power when a real decision comes up later? The loud spender has bought a round of approval, and approval is expensive because it expires fast. The quiet man has bought nothing. He has preserved leverage. He leaves with his margin intact, his name attached to restraint instead of theater, and the room has to work a little harder to figure him out. Good. Let them. A man who needs to be instantly decoded is already paying too much. Buffett understood the same principle in public. You do not need to look hungry to stay dangerous. You need patience, and the patience to be misread. Restraint is a signal. It tells the room you are not for sale. If this kind of cold read sharpens the way you spend, subscribe and like now. You stay close to this room, where every expensive gesture gets stripped down before it gets mistaken for power. He does it again at the same table, with the same people, and the same look in his eyes when the premium bottle is placed in front of him. Then, 3 days later, he is complaining that he is behind everyone else. That is not bad luck. That is a leak with a ritual attached. You watch the pattern, and it starts to look almost mechanical. The night begins with a little pressure in the air, a pause that asks who is going to be the man who can absorb the room. He answers before anyone else can. The bottle comes out. The room loosens. The check gets heavier. For a few minutes, he gets the easy version of power, laughter, attention, the sense that he is not the one being sized up. Then the bill disappears, but the cost does not. It follows him home as reduced margin, and reduced margin becomes reduced options. Fewer quiet wins. Less room to recover from a bad month. More need to keep the image intact the next time the same group sits down. The second dinner is never just a second dinner. It is the next payment on the first one. That is delayed dominance. You trade future control for present applause, and the trade looks small until it repeats. Once it repeats, it compounds in the wrong direction. The man who keeps buying the room starts needing the room to keep believing him. He has to perform again, because if he stops, the spell breaks and the identity he rented for the night starts to look expensive in daylight. Morgan Housel writes in The Psychology of Money that wealth is not just about intelligence. It is about behavior, and behavior under pressure. That is the part this table exposes. Under pressure, your friend is not calculating the bottle. He is paying to quiet the discomfort of feeling behind. The wine is just the object his insecurity can touch. Quietly, that is why he stays stuck. Not because one premium bottle destroyed him, because each one trains him to solve unease with spending instead of control. And spending for relief is the kind of habit that never finishes the job. It only asks for another round. You can hear the trap in the complaint afterward. He says he wants to catch up, but the last thing he bought was not status. It was relief. The bill lands on the table, and he reaches for the expensive bottle before anyone else can read the room. That hand is not reaching for wine. It is reaching for a verdict. You have seen this move. The menu is gone, the jokes have thinned, and one gesture suddenly decides who feels large and who feels watched. If you keep spending to stop that feeling, what exactly are you buying? Approval or silence? That is the cost. Not the bottle itself. It is the obligation it creates in your own mind. Once you teach yourself that discomfort must be paid off, every room becomes a place where your leverage leaks out by the glass. The people around you may call it generosity. Your balance calls it a habit. The colder man does something less dramatic. He lets the room adjust. He does not beg to be priced quickly. He does not purchase belonging at the first hint of delay. That restraint looks small for 10 minutes. It looks expensive for 10 years. This is the part nobody likes. The real sacrifice is not money alone. It is the death of the performance you use to feel important. Handing back the bottle means you may be misunderstood. It means the room may sit with your silence long enough to discover it does not own you. And that is the deeper question waiting under every bill. Which debt are you servicing when you spend to look elevated? Your future, or your insecurity? The man who stays rich learns to refuse the moments that only feel powerful while the cork is coming out. Sometimes the strongest move is the quiet one. Hand the bottle back, let the room shift, and keep your leverage intact. If this kind of clarity is useful, subscribe. Stay close to the rooms that try to price you before you speak.